There is a question that Iranian counterintelligence has never been able to fully answer. Not how she got in. They know how she got in, not what she took. They know what she took. The question that still sits open in classified files in Tehran is simpler and far more disturbing. How long did they trust her before they should have stopped? Her name, for the purposes of what you are about to hear, is Yasmin. That is not her real name. Her real name belongs to a different woman, a woman who no longer exists in any practical sense. A French passport, a Jewish family in Paris, a degree in psychology, a second degree in finance. A woman who by any measure had a life already built. That life ended in a cafe. Not dramatically, not with a gun on the table or a threat. Someone sat across from her and asked a question, and she said yes. What she said yes to would take nearly 15 years to fully understand. The thing about deep cover is that it doesn't begin with the cover. It begins with what is already real. Mossad's long-duration operations, the ones that last not months but years, are built on a principle that most people find counterintuitive. You do not find a person and teach them to become someone else from scratch. You find a person who already carries part of the target identity inside them, genuinely, and you build the rest around that core. Yasmin was curious about Islam, not in an academic way, not in the way a journalist becomes curious about a subject they plan to write about and move on from. She had been drawn to it since university. She had friends in London's Iranian diaspora. She had read theology that most Western-educated Jewish women had never encountered. She had questions that the faith seemed, to her, to be genuinely trying to answer. That curiosity was not manufactured by any intelligence service. It was the reason she was chosen. The preparation ran from 2006 to late 2008. 18 months of formal work. Months more of what her handler called consolidation. The process of living inside the constructed identity until the seams disappeared. Her handler is referred to in this account only as the man who found her. He was senior. He had run operations in 3 countries before he sat down across from Yasmin. He told her, in their first real operational meeting, that the cover they were building would only survive if she never thought of it as a cover. She would not be performing a Muslim convert. She would become one in every observable way, at every moment she was in the field. Her prayers would be real prayers. Her convictions, when expressed, would carry the weight of genuine conviction. Her friendships would be real friendships. This is where the first cost was seeded. Not announced, not explained, just planted. Because real friendships produce real obligations, and real obligations eventually conflict with operational necessity. The legend, the fabricated life history, was built around a kernel of truth. French, educated. A conversion experience that began in London through a relationship. A marriage to a Yemeni Muslim scholar, arranged through channels Yasmin was not fully briefed on. A marriage that was legally real, carried out through proper religious process. The man she married under this arrangement was not fully aware of what he was part of. He knew she had unusual connections. He was told she worked in consulting, in security-adjacent research. He was warm. He was not a suspicious person by nature. He was also a variable her handlers could not fully control. A person who is not a witting asset cannot be managed like one. They make choices. They ask questions at dinner. They feel things and act on those feelings without checking with anyone. He was the first unresolved risk. By 2010, Yasmin's cover persona had a published record, essays in English and Farsi, political commentary, theological reflection, criticism of Western foreign policy, written with enough precision to signal genuine engagement, not performance. The pieces were placed on platforms read by the Iranian diaspora, then picked up by Iranian state-aligned media. She had not approached Iran. She had made herself visible. and Iran's media monitoring apparatus, which routinely surveilled diaspora publications for usable voices, had found her. Within 2 years, her work was being republished on platforms associated with the Office of the Supreme Leader. Within 3, she received an invitation to contribute directly. Her handler considered this a success, and it was. The timeline was running faster than projected. Access that they had planned to build over 5 years was materializing in 3. But accelerated access means accelerated exposure. A target that comes to you quickly is also a target whose intelligence services are paying attention to you quickly. Iran's initial interest in Yasmin was institutional and enthusiastic. That enthusiasm was not only an open door, it was also scrutiny. That was the second unresolved risk. Tehran, 2013. She arrived on a French passport. The invitation was formal, a think tank, government-aligned, that had been publishing her work. She was met not by a security official, not by a bureaucrat, but by a woman. The wife of a mid-ranking IRGC intelligence officer. A woman she had been corresponding with for over a year through Islamic study forums. A woman named Mariam who had read every piece Yasmin had published, who had written to her about theology and children and the difficulty of living a devout life in a world that didn't understand it. Mariam had lobbied her own husband to facilitate the visa. She met Yasmin at the airport with warmth and without any reserve. She had a car. She had plans for dinner. She had, it was clear, been looking forward to this for months. Yasmin had targeted Mariam specifically, not because of who Mariam was, because of who Mariam was married to. The deception began before Yasmin cleared customs. What Yasmin's handlers had told her about Mariam was operational. Her husband's rank, his unit, his general area of oversight within IRGC logistics. What they had not, could not tell her was what Mariam would be like as a person. Whether she would be guarded or open. Whether she would be the kind of woman who watched and calculated, or the kind who simply trusted. Mariam was the second kind. And this created a problem that no briefing document addresses directly. What do you do when the person you are deceiving is genuinely good? The operational answer is clean. You continue, you maintain. You extract what is needed, and you protect the mission. The human answer is not clean, and Yasmin was still human. Over the following months, she sat in Mariam's kitchen dozens of times. She watched Mariam's children grow. She shared meals cooked from recipes Mariam taught her. She listened to things Mariam told her that Mariam told no one else. The pressures of her marriage, the loneliness of being the wife of a man whose work he could never discuss, the fear that lived permanently in households connected to the IRGC, the fear that never had a name but was always present. And through all of it, Mariam talked about her husband, not in ways she understood as sensitive, not with any awareness that she was providing anything useful. She talked about him the way wives talk about husbands, with exasperation, with pride, with the casual intimacy of a person who has no idea they are being listened to for any purpose beyond friendship. Yasmin remembered everything. 6 months into her first Tehran posting, her handler sent a message through the courier channel. The message was not a directive, it was a question. Is there an access path to the general? The general was not Mariam's husband. He was a figure several ranks above, a brigadier general overseeing Quds Force logistics across the Western Corridor. A man who did not appear in newspapers, who had no public presence, who was, from Israel's perspective, a priority target of significant intelligence value. Yasmin knew who the question was really about. She had heard the general's name at Mariam's table. She sent back a single word: yes. What she did not send, what she did not yet fully understand, was the cost of that yes. Not the operational cost, not the risk to her cover, the cost to Mariam. Because the path to the general ran directly through a friendship that Mariam believed was real. And the answer to whether that friendship was real, whether anything built on deception can be called real, is the question this operation never resolved. Not then, not later, not even now. The path to the general was not a plan, not yet. It was a direction. Yasmin's handler had identified the target. She had confirmed access was possible. What neither of them had mapped was the mechanism, the specific sequence of social moves required to bring a French-born female journalist into proximity with a man whose entire professional existence was designed to be invisible. The answer, when it came, was not a Mossad strategy. It was an invitation to dinner. Mariam's husband hosted gatherings twice a year. Conservative affairs, senior IRGC families, rotating through each other's homes in the careful social choreography of Iran's military elite. The dinners were segregated, men in one room, women in another, which meant that the intelligence value for any male operative would have been near zero. For Yasmin, it was the opposite. The women's room was where the institution actually breathed, where frustrations were spoken that were never spoken in front of husbands, where names were mentioned without caution because the names were assumed to stay in the room, where the invisible logistics of powerful men's lives, their travel, their moods, their schedules, their pressures, were discussed with the unself-conscious openness of people who did not believe they were discussing anything sensitive. Yasmin attended her first such dinner in the spring of 2014. She sat next to the wife of a Quds Force colonel and spent 2 hours listening to a woman describe, in exhaustive and unwitting detail, the administrative structure of her husband's unit, the frequency of his travel to Damascus, and the name of the Syrian officer he coordinated with directly. She returned to her apartment that night and sat at the small desk in her room for 3 hours. Not writing, not encoding, just sitting with what she now knew. The general's wife attended the third dinner Yasmin was invited to. She arrived late. She was younger than Yasmin had expected, younger than her husband by nearly 2 decades, quiet in the way that some women in powerful households are quiet, which is to say not timid, but watchful. Her name was Nasrin. Yasmin did not approach her directly. She did something more effective. She positioned herself near a conversation Nasrin was already in, listened carefully, and at a precise moment contributed a single comment about a Quranic passage, about its interpretation in a specific classical tradition that was accurate enough to be impressive and humble enough to be disarming. Nasrin looked at her. Then she said, "Where did you study?" That question was the door. Over the following 4 months, Yasmin and Nasrin met 7 times. Tea, a visit to a shrine, a lecture at a religious institute that Nasrin attended regularly, a long afternoon in Nasrin's private garden while her children played and her husband was, as always, elsewhere and unreachable. Nasrin was lonely in the specific way that the wives of powerful men are lonely, surrounded by people who treated her with deference rather than honesty, whose social value to everyone around her was entirely derived from her proximity to her husband. Yasmin treated her like a person. This was not a manipulation technique from a training manual. It was simply what Yasmin did, because by now the line between her operational behavior and her actual behavior had blurred past the point where she could clearly locate it. She genuinely liked Nasrin. She found her sharp, underestimated, quietly funny. She also, at every meeting, listened for anything that would help Israel map her husband's operations. These 2 things coexisted. That is the part that no operational debrief fully captures, not the information extracted, but the fact that the extraction was wrapped in something that felt, from the inside, like genuine human connection. In late 2014, Yasmin's handler passed a new directive through the courier chain. The operation had been reviewed at a senior level. The access she had developed to Mariam's household, to the women's network, now to Nasrin, was considered exceptional. The intelligence product was already being used in active targeting assessments. The directive was to accelerate, specifically to engineer a direct introduction to the general himself. Yasmin sent back a response that was not in the standard format. It was written in plain language, which was itself a signal that something was wrong. Direct introduction is premature. Nasrin is not yet settled in her trust. If I move faster than the relationship allows, she will notice the pace. Women like her always notice the pace. Her handler's reply came back in 2 days. Noted. Timeline is not optional. This is the fracture, not a dramatic one, not a confrontation. Just 2 words. Timeline is not optional. That meant the operation was being driven by something external to the operation itself. A political pressure. An intelligence priority that had shifted at a level above her handler. Something she was not being told. She was being asked to risk a relationship she had spent months carefully building. Risk Nasrin noticing. Risk the entire women's network becoming suspicious. Because someone in Tel Aviv had decided the calendar mattered more than the architecture. She complied. Under protest, she complied. Because refusing a direct directive is not an option available to a deep cover operative who has no safe way to escalate disagreement. She accelerated. The introduction happened through a social mechanism she had observed but not yet used, a formal religious gathering at a senior cleric's home, to which both Nasrin's household and the general himself were invited, mixed, in the specific sense that husbands and wives arrived together, moved through introductions together before the evening divided along gender lines. Yasmin was invited through Mariam. She stood in a receiving room for approximately 4 minutes in the general's presence. She said perhaps 40 words to him directly. He was polite, briefly interested, visibly distracted. A man at a social event he was attending out of obligation rather than desire. Nothing in those 4 minutes would have suggested to any observer that anything significant had occurred. But Yasmin had done what she had been sent to do. She had placed herself in his field of view. She had been introduced by a family his household trusted. The door was open. Everyone assumed the deception was working because of Yasmin. Her language, her theology, her published record, her patience in building relationships, her instinct for social positioning, all of it was attributed, by her handlers and by the Iranian social network she was embedded in, to the quality of the cover and the quality of the operative. That assumption was wrong, or rather, it was incomplete. Mariam knew, not everything, not operationally. She did not know the word Mossad. She did not know the specific intelligence product Yasmin was producing. She did not know about the courier chain or the handler or the meetings in Ankara. But she knew that Yasmin was not entirely what she presented herself to be. She had known it, in some unverified, unspoken register, since approximately the 6th month of their friendship. The signal had not been dramatic. It was a single moment. A conversation about Mariam's husband's transfer to a new posting. A piece of information that was not secret, but was also not public, in which Yasmin had shown a flicker of interest that was slightly too specific. A question that was one question too many. Mariam had felt it. Felt the way you feel when someone asks you something and the texture of the question is subtly wrong, not hostile, not obvious, but calibrated in a way that natural curiosity is not. She had said nothing. Not then, and not in the months and years that followed. The reasons Mariam said nothing are not fully knowable. What the subsequent investigation would reveal, years later, is that when Iranian counterintelligence finally questioned her directly, her testimony was consistent, detailed, and entirely corroborative of Yasmin's cover. She confirmed dates, she confirmed conversations. She provided context that resolved minor inconsistencies in ways that protected the legend rather than exposed it. This was not the testimony of a woman who had suspected nothing. This was the testimony of a woman who had made a choice. The operation had survived not because the cover was perfect. The cover was not perfect. There had been a flaw visible to at least one person inside the network from the earliest stages. It had survived because Mariam, the woman Yasmin had targeted through Mariam's own husband, the woman whose kitchen she had sat in dozens of times, the woman whose children she had watched grow up, had chosen, for reasons she has never publicly explained, to protect her. This is what the operational review called the foundational miscalculation. They had assumed the deception was load-bearing. It was. But beneath it was something they had not built, had not planned for, and could not have engineered. A human decision made privately by someone who had every institutional reason to make the opposite one. When Yasmin's handler was eventually briefed on this, years later, after extraction, after the full picture had been reconstructed, he was quiet for a long time. Then he said something that did not make it into any official record, but was recalled by a colleague present in the room. "We thought we were running the operation. She was running the operation. And Mariam was running both of us." Whether that was true, whether Mariam's silence was protective, or simply the product of a woman who could not bring herself to act on what she suspected, is a question that cannot be answered with the available evidence. What can be said is this: the deception succeeded. It produced intelligence that shaped operations. It ran for years inside one of the most surveilled environments on Earth. And at its center, holding it together in a way no handler had designed, was a woman who was supposed to be a target. Who was, instead, something much harder to categorize. And who would pay for that choice, whatever its true nature, in ways she had never agreed to, never understood, and never deserved. The operation was not done, but the terms on which it was running had just changed completely. And Yasmin didn't know it yet. The first attempt failed before it began. In early 2015, Yasmin was positioned for what her handler had described as the critical social move, engineering a situation in which the general would encounter her not as a peripheral acquaintance from a religious gathering, but as a substantive presence in his domestic world. A person Nasrin had begun to rely on, a person whose presence in the household had texture and history. The mechanism was simple. Nasrin had mentioned, across several of their meetings, that she was looking for a tutor for her eldest daughter. English, literature, something that would prepare the girl for a European-style education. Yasmin had positioned herself carefully over 3 months to be the obvious, natural suggestion. The plan was for Nasrin to make the offer herself, organically, without Yasmin asking. Nasrin never made the offer, not because of suspicion, because the general, in a rare intervention into domestic logistics, decided his daughter would be educated by a woman connected to a specific religious institution, an institution he trusted because he had personally vetted its director years earlier. The plan was dead. No one had detected anything. No cover had flickered. The operation had simply collided with the ordinary, unmappable decision-making of a family. Yasmin reported the outcome to her handler. His response took 4 days. 4 days during which she continued her regular social calendar, tea with Mariam, a lecture, a gathering at a mosque, while carrying the full weight of an operation that had just lost its primary insertion point. When the response came, it was a single instruction: wait. Waiting in deep cover is not passive. It is one of the most technically demanding states an operative can maintain, because the cover must continue performing at full intensity, while the operative has no operational objective to anchor their focus. Yasmin attended dinners. She wrote essays. She prayed, genuinely, in the way she had been doing for years now, in a practice that had long since stopped feeling like performance. She waited for 3 months, and then, Without any intervention from her or her handlers, the situation changed. Nasrin's mother fell ill. A serious illness, a hospitalization, a crisis that pulled Nasrin's attention and emotional resources in a direction that her husband's world did not accommodate. The general was traveling. He was unreachable in the specific way that IRGC officers become unreachable, not because of hostility, but because the institution demands a totality of presence that leaves nothing for ordinary family emergency. Nasrin called Yasmin, not Mariam, not the women from the religious institute. Yasmin. She called her because Yasmin was, by that point, the person in her social world who felt most like a friend, without complicated loyalties, without history with her husband's colleagues, without the institutional awareness that made everyone else in her circle slightly guarded even in moments of genuine distress. Yasmin spent 3 days with Nasrin during the worst of it. She sat in a hospital waiting room. She handled logistics. She was, by any observable measure, exactly what a friend is supposed to be in a crisis. When the general returned, Nasrin told him what Yasmin had done. He invited her to dinner. This was not the plan. The plan had been a slow, managed approach through a tutoring role that no longer existed. What had actually happened was faster, less controlled, and built on a foundation of genuine care that Yasmin had not been able to simulate because she had not needed to simulate it. She had actually helped Nasrin, and that help had opened the door. Her handler, when she reported the development, assessed it as a success, an accelerated access. The timeline pressure he had been relaying for months had finally resolved in their favor. He was reading the situation incorrectly. The dinner was not access to the general's operational world. It was access to the general's social performance, the version of himself he deployed in domestic settings with guests his wife had personally vouched for. Warm, measured, professionally opaque in the specific way that men who handle secrets are always opaque, not through calculation but through habit. Yasmin recognized the gap immediately. She reported back, "Dinner achieved. Direct operational access is not yet present. This will require sustained presence, not extraction." Her handler marked the dinner as a milestone. She knew it was a beginning. That divergence between what Tel Aviv was reading and what she was actually navigating would widen steadily over the following year. The sustained presence took 8 months. 8 months of dinners, gatherings, casual drop-ins that Nasrin orchestrated without any prompting. The general became accustomed to Yasmin in the peripheral way that busy men become accustomed to their wives' friendships, as background, as furniture, as a presence that required no particular attention. This was exactly the position Yasmin needed, because men who are accustomed to a presence stop performing in front of it. He began to talk at dinner the way he talked when guests were not present. Not carelessly, never carelessly, but with the slightly lowered register of a man who has decided, without quite deciding, that the woman across the table from his wife is not a risk. He mentioned a logistics challenge in the Western Corridor. He mentioned a name, a Syrian procurement contact, in the context of a complaint about delays. He mentioned a timeline for a transfer of personnel that he clearly assumed meant nothing to a French convert who wrote theological essays. Yasmin remembered every word. The near abort came in the autumn of 2016. A counterintelligence officer from the IRGC's Internal Security Division paid a visit to Mariam's household. Routine, it was described as. A periodic review connected to her husband's unit. Yasmin was not present. She learned about the visit from Mariam 3 days later, mentioned in passing over tea, with no particular weight given to it. Mariam described it as administrative, dull. A young officer with a clipboard asking questions about household visitors and social contacts. Yasmin's name would have come up. She did not know what Mariam had said. She could not ask directly. Asking directly, expressing any particular concern about a routine administrative visit, would have been the wrong texture of reaction. A genuinely innocent person would not calculate the risk of a clipboard. She said nothing. She drank her tea. She asked about Mariam's daughter's school performance. She reported the visit to her handler that night. The response came back within 24 hours. It was the clearest language her handler had ever used with her. We recommend suspension pending assessment. Await confirmation before next contact with primary network. Suspension meant stopping all social engagements. No tea with Mariam, no dinners with Nasrin, no mosque gatherings. It meant the cover continuing to exist in theory while disappearing from practice, and disappearance from practice in a social network built on consistent presence would itself generate questions. Yasmin sent back her assessment. Suspension is more dangerous than continuation. Unexplained absence at this stage will register. I continue. She did not wait for authorization. She attended Mariam's daughter's birthday gathering 2 days later. The counterintelligence visit, as best she could reconstruct from signals over the following weeks, had produced nothing actionable. Mariam's account of household visitors had apparently been unremarkable. The clipboard had moved on. This felt like release. Her handler, when the all-clear was eventually assessed, treated it as confirmation that the cover was solid. Yasmin felt something different. Not relief, something closer to unease. Because the visit had been routine and she had survived it, and the most straightforward explanation was that her cover had held. But there was another explanation that she could not dismiss and could not verify, that Mariam had been asked about her and had answered in a specific way. Not a way that revealed nothing, a way that protected her. She had no evidence for this. It was an instinct. The kind of instinct that accumulates over years of reading rooms, reading people, reading the microtextures of how conversations land. She did not report the instinct to her handler. Some things she had learned you carry alone. Because reporting them opens questions that have no good answers. Because a handler who starts wondering whether a primary network contact has become a witting protector of the asset is a handler who starts wondering whether the entire operation is compromised. And the operation was not compromised. Or it was compromised in a way she didn't yet have language for. She sat with that question through the autumn and into the winter. She kept attending dinners. She kept listening. She kept sending intelligence through the courier chain. And she kept not knowing whether the ground she was standing on was solid, or whether it was solid because someone she had deceived had quietly decided to hold it steady for her. That not knowing did not resolve. It simply became part of the operation. Another thing she carried. Another weight with no name. The operation did not end with a discovery. It ended with an accumulation. This is how most long-duration deep cover operations actually collapse, not through a single catastrophic exposure, not through a dramatic confrontation in a corridor, but through the slow, quiet piling up of small inconsistencies that individually mean nothing and collectively become impossible to explain away. The first inconsistency that entered the system was administrative. A counterintelligence analyst, not the same officer who had visited Mariam's household, someone newer, more methodical, was conducting a routine cross-reference of foreign nationals with sustained access to IRGC adjacent social networks. Yasmin's name appeared on the list. Her published record was reviewed. Her visa history was reviewed. In an essay from 2009, she had referenced attending a specific religious gathering in Lyon during a month when, according to records obtained through an Iranian intelligence contact in France, the gathering had not taken place on the date she described. One date, one gathering, one discrepancy, small enough to be a memory error. It was flagged, not urgently, logged and placed in a review queue that moved slowly, as bureaucratic queues do, with no particular momentum behind it. Yasmin did not know this document existed. What accelerated the timeline was not the document. It was the general's promotion. In the late 2018, he was elevated to a command role that triggered a mandatory household security review, not of him, but of his immediate social environment, his wife's contacts, the people with regular access to the domestic sphere of a man now overseeing a significantly expanded operational portfolio. Yasmin's name moved from a slow-moving review queue to an active investigation file. The analyst assigned to her case was careful. She did not move quickly. She began pulling threads, the Lion discrepancy, the visa timeline, the biographical details that were verifiable against French public records, and laying them alongside each other without yet drawing conclusions. The threads were not damning individually. Together, they were beginning to form a shape. In early 2019, Yasmin received a social visit from a woman she had not met before. A friend of Nasrin's, introduced casually, who had apparently heard about the French scholar through the household network and was curious to meet her. The woman was not a friend of Nasrin's. Yasmin knew this within the first 10 minutes of conversation. Not because the woman said anything wrong, because she said everything exactly right. Her questions were phrased with the specific texture of someone who had been briefed on what answers to expect and was listening for deviation, not content. Yasmin performed flawlessly. She answered as Yasmin always answered. She introduced the small vulnerabilities she had been trained to introduce, minor uncertainties, slight hesitations on peripheral details that made the performance feel like a person rather than a script. The woman thanked her for the tea and left. Yasmin reported the contact to her handler within hours. This time, his response was immediate. Begin exit preparation. Exit preparation in a deep cover operation of this duration is not a clean process. It cannot be. A person who has been embedded in a social network for 6 years, who has a legal marriage under the law of the country she is operating in, who has relationships, real ones, whatever that means in this context, cannot simply disappear without the disappearance itself becoming evidence. The cover story Yasmin and her handler had agreed upon 18 months earlier, a medical consultation in France, a health matter too private to discuss in detail, was now the only viable mechanism. She told the general she needed to travel. He did not want her to go. He offered, with the quiet authority of a man accustomed to making problems disappear, to arrange whatever she needed in Tehran. Specialists, private care, whatever the matter required. She refused. She told him it was personal, that her family was involved, that she preferred to handle it in France. For the first time in years, he looked at her with something she could not fully read, not suspicion. Something more ambiguous than suspicion. The look of a man who has spent his career recognizing when a door is being closed and is deciding whether to push it. He didn't push it. She left Tehran in November 2020. The material Yasmin had extracted over 6 years was not a single cache of documents. It was a mosaic, hundreds of fragments, names, routes, dates, structural observations that Mossad's analytical division had been assembling in real time throughout the operation. The mosaic, when complete enough to act on, contributed to targeting assessments that identified Quds Force logistics nodes across the Western Corridor. Names she had provided were cross-referenced against signals intelligence to locate individuals who had no detectable digital signature. Routes she had described from dinner conversation were mapped against satellite imagery to confirm supply line infrastructure that had previously been theoretical. The intelligence was used, operationally, consequentially, in ways that produced effects on the ground that she would later read about in news reports without her name anywhere near them. This is the part that official accounts describe as success. What official accounts do not describe is the cost structure beneath the success. 3 people connected to Yasmin's network in Tehran were arrested in 2021, not immediately after her departure. Several months later, after Iranian counterintelligence had finished reconstructing the network she had moved through. 2 were individuals who had facilitated her access in ways they had not fully understood, peripheral figures, people who had helped arrange a meeting, passed an invitation, provided a connection without knowing what they were facilitating. 1 was someone closer to the center of what she had built. The charges against all 3 were processed through Iran's revolutionary court system. The proceedings were not public. The outcomes were confirmed only through secondary intelligence channels, and later, through human rights monitoring organizations that track such cases without always having complete information. 2 of the 3 did not survive the process. This outcome was not unforeseen in the abstract. The possibility of downstream arrests is written into the risk assessment of every operation of this type. It is acknowledged, calculated, weighted against the intelligence value of proceeding. The calculation had been made. The operation had proceeded. The people who were arrested had not been part of the calculation in any meaningful sense. They had simply been in the network, in the radius, in the wrong proximity to a woman who had been very carefully placed there. Mariam was detained in early 2022. She was held for 6 months. The charges against her were never formally published. She was released eventually into a life that was no longer the one she had inhabited before. Her husband's posting was reduced. Her social world collapsed inward. The invisible damage that follows a security investigation in a society organized around institutional trust, spreading through every relationship she had. She had not spied. She had not passed intelligence. She had not knowingly assisted any operation. What she had done, or what the Iranian system concluded she had done, was fail to report suspicion when suspicion was present. Whether that suspicion was ever truly present, and what she had actually chosen in those years of silence, remained a question that no external observer could answer. What could be said was this: the cost of that silence, whatever its motivation, was paid entirely by Mariam. Yasmin's debrief ran for months. The intelligence product was reviewed. The network was mapped retrospectively. The counterintelligence visit, the investigative file, the analytical work of the woman who had been sent to have tea with her, all of it was reconstructed with the clarity that comes after the fact, when every decision can be examined without the pressure of being incited. The debrief produced a thorough operational record. It did not produce a person who could return to the life that had existed before 2006. Her real identity was now connected, in Iranian intelligence files, to the cover identity. Her face had been distributed. Her family in France had been placed under protective measures by Israeli security services. She could not live under her own name in any country with Iranian intelligence presence, which is to say most countries. She was issued a new identity, the third identity she had carried. The first had been the real one. The second had been Yasmin. The third was neither. Her handler, in their final formal meeting, asked her a question that he had not asked before. Not a debrief question, a personal one. If you had known, in 2006, what the final cost would be, not the intelligence value, not the operational outcome, but the actual human cost, would you have said yes in that cafe? She did not answer immediately. Then she said, "I don't know who I would have been by the time I was capable of answering that question honestly. The operation exists in no official record. The woman who ran it lives under a name that is not hers, in a location that is not disclosed, with a history that cannot be spoken. The intelligence she produced shaped events whose consequences are still unfolding. The people she left behind in Tehran are living, or not living, with outcomes they did not choose. And the question she was asked in a cafe in Paris, 'Would you be willing to become someone else?' turned out to have an answer that could not be known until it was too late to change it. If you want to understand how the world's most consequential operations are actually run, not with technology, not with force, but with patience, with identity, with the deliberate cost of human connection, this channel covers those stories with the weight they deserve. The next one is already in the file.